Hi everyone, we started recording. This is the third and the last meeting of INTS 499 for final presentations, the capstone experience in international studies. And I will transform all these videos by tonight, and I will give the links for YouTube to Dr. Lutz so she can share with everybody else. Two of the students, as you know, Emma Kirtner and Brennan Warren, actually made their PowerPoint presentations with voice in the background. So we will find a solution for all these recordings to be available to all of you. So today we'll listen to Bethany Garcia and Sydney Becker. Bethany, you have the floor. Please share your screen.
Let's do Sydney first.
Oh, sorry, Sydney, you said. Yes, sorry.
Okay, just a second. Okay. Okay, so I did my senior assignment on crisis in the Philippines. And to start out with a little summary of the Philippines and what it all has to offer. Sorry, I'm going to move your guys' video here. It is described as an archipelago, which is a word I can't usually pronounce, so I'm proud of myself for that. But basically, it's just defined as a group of islands, and in this case, there's 7,100 islands that are in Southeast Asia, and it is located in the Western Pacific Ocean. The biggest island, Luzon, holds the most amount of their population, and only about 1/3 of their islands are actually inhabited. Since it is all islands surrounded by water, it also has one of the world's longest coastlines. And unfortunately, with the country's geographical location, it is quite the hot spot for natural disaster because it is located in the volcanic ring of fire. It lays on huge earthquake faults, and it is in the Pacific typhoon belt. So it's terribly unlucky. And, you know, the Philippines in our eyes seems like the perfect vacation location, but reality locals kind of think probably the opposite. Actually, people who don't live more inland in like Luzon, many other people live on the coastlines to support the country's main industries, which one of the main industries is fishing. In 1988, exports of fish products totaled to $407 million, which controlled 6% of total exports. And before that, industry kind of primarily consisted of manufacturing of like cosmetics, electronics, furniture, and now in more recent times, it's kind of shifting to pharmaceutical production. And it's on the rise with 4.5% annual growth over the next 5 years, which is crazy. And tourism, which is probably the biggest industry I'll talk about the most later, contributes 11% of the country's non-merchandise exports. As for agriculture, it usually is divided into these 4 sectors that they kind of focus on, which is farming, fishing, livestock, forestry. And together they employ 39.8% of the labor force and contribute 20% of the nation's GDP. So it would be nice if like the agriculture of the Philippines could remain untouched, because if anything were to ruin it, the Philippine people like literally, legitimately cannot afford losing that source of income and food supply. So what could possibly be ruining the agriculture industry? And that is climate change. It affects the world. It affects the world and vulnerable areas such as the Philippines. But I like how National Geographic defines it. Short and sweet, it's the long-term alteration of temperature and typical weather patterns in a place. Oops, I'm sorry. But yeah, these temperatures are caused mostly by human activity in the advancing of industry. For example, you know, we unknowingly or knowingly drive cars, thousands of people drive cars every day, and it just puts emissions of carbon dioxide into the air, just adding to the issue. And like I said, you know, more countries are vulnerable than others, but it is our job, the more fortunate ones, to, you know, take a step ahead and try to help people that are actually in need. Yeah, like the Midwest, the closest thing we have to relate to climate change, that because we can't see or feel most of the effects, is last month in November, it was 70 degrees outside for like 2 weeks, which is completely out of the ordinary and absurd. So climate change is quite the explanation. But how climate change affects the Philippines, which is global warming, you know, the Earth's surface is heating. When we think of heating, we think of things melting, ice melting, glaciers melting, and all of this ice turning to water goes into like oceans and seas, and it causes the sea levels to rise. And there's a direct correlation between sea levels rising and tropical storms occurring. And the sad part is most of the people in the Philippines that don't live inland, like on Luzon, as said earlier, they live on the coastlines, especially on the eastern Philippines. So they're already in a huge amount of danger in the first place during monsoon season, but this just puts everybody at higher risk. One of the effects of climate change is salinity, and to explain that, the Philippines is comprised of freshwater systems, rivers that just go through the island, and say if a monsoon hits, the country and coastlines flood with salt water, and the salt water seeps into the soil and into underground water aquifers. So this erodes the shorelines, beaches, and farmland, and it contaminates all of their drinking water. And then soil becomes too poor to sustain any agriculture, and people who are living on the coastlines are most likely flooded out. Another thing is mangrove destruction and coral bleaching. Mangroves are, I didn't know what this was until researching it, are basically just plants underwater, usually along coastlines, that are essential to maintaining water quality, function as habitats, provide food for many species, and their unique rooting system holds soil against storms. So it basically acts like a big fence kind of defense mechanism. It takes some of the energy from a typhoon coming in and absorbs it, so the impact on land isn't, you know, as detrimental. And coral bleaching occurs from temperatures rising and careless human activity, which is usually during tourism, with people touching it, you know, taking pictures of coral reefs, stepping on it. And this bleaching destroys species, ecosystems, and sources of food. And so with the reduction of these mangroves and coral bleaching, this automatically leads to the decline in the fishing industry, since there's no fish to even begin with, like to supply for anybody. And the soil is destroyed and eroded by the salt in the water, so residents' food supply becomes scarce, and they have nothing to produce and sell to make any kind of income in the first place. So it's kind of a never-ending cycle. Another thing is drought. So once monsoon season is over, dry season comes around the corner, and with all this salt in the soil, it dries out all of the land, and like said earlier, it makes agriculture completely unsustainable. And just weathers are taking such extremes. On the other side of the spectrum, during monsoon or wet season, heavy rainfall is really prominent, and this creates a humid climate, and with humid climate comes, you know, great living conditions for pests and disease with crops and animals, and this could lead to famine, food scarcity, and just overall a mess in the nation. So with tourism, there's a lot of pros because, I mean, it provides employment opportunities and economic stability, but climate change can affect and probably eliminate tourism in the future if nothing is acted on. You know, due to the consequences of climate change, sea levels are rising and land is physically just disappearing. And tourism itself damages the island and the land it's on. There's a lot of policies put into place to preserve it, but the bigger industry gets, the harder it is to control. And, you know, tourism does boost the economy, but at the same time, it does destroy the environment, and it puts agriculture lower on the priority list, which once you get rid of agriculture, no income hardly and no food supply. And another big thing is that cities that are hit by these disasters begin to actually sink due to the pumping of groundwater for daily use. And the gross part about this is sewage systems usually get clogged and leaked into this water, and then like water is completely contaminated and people are drinking this, just living in completely unsanitary conditions. And that's where the vocab word climate refugees comes in. Near 4 million families are living in unsafe, unsanitary, and unsustainable conditions. According to World Bank, storm surges are projected to affect about 14% of the total population and 42% of coastal populations. Typhoon Haiyan was the strongest tropical cyclone in recorded history, and it claimed more than 6,300 lives and left an estimated 4.1 million displaced. So these people have no choice. It's purely based on where they are born and just poverty level. You know, they can't escape it. These people are left to fight for their lives, and it's inevitable unless something is done. And the number of these displaced people are only going to go up. So some options that these refugees or displaced people can pursue. The Philippines doesn't offer any of these relocation or resettlement policies, but I found one about the island of Kiribati that is located in the Pacific Ocean. And what they did, if disaster strikes, they bought a piece of land in like higher grounds in Fiji, and they are all allowed to move and resettle there. The government has it all laid out for them, and they could use it for farming, just resettlement, you know, just something that doesn't leave citizens in a complete panic state. And there's a lot of organizations that allow, you know, people to go out of the country and work on a travel visa, work visa, but in this way it helps people, you know, come back and be financially stable just to prepare for if something were to ever happen to their country. But climate refugees, to be considered one, you have to cross an international border. But on the other hand, the people that don't have enough money to move, are not financially stable, or their country's government don't have any type of policy that allows them to do this, they are unfortunately stuck in their country, kind of left floating around. They have nowhere to call home, and there's nowhere they can go because they are stuck in this poverty level. And as you can see on the chart, in the year 2012, Typhoon Haiyan hit, which left a bunch of people, new people displaced. And then around 2016, and I don't remember what the hurricane or typhoon's name was, but it was also a major natural disaster. And that's when both of them peaked. So it does go down, but then, you know, monsoon season comes back around and it just restarts the entire never-ending circle. Luckily, there are many organizations that are established to help refugees and natural disaster victims, short-term and long-term. And they're all nonprofits or NGOs that teach people how to prepare preventative actions, adapt, preserve resources and supplies, reconstruct, and emphasize human rights and make sure that, you know, their dignity isn't stripped from them. And there's a lot of NGOs, but one of my favorite ones I found was Habitat for Humanity, that was started in 1988. And basically it just provides all the daily necessities of, you know, living in general. And that's just access to clean water, sustainable energy, healthcare, education, and livelihood. And it's amazing to see because a lot of people, since the Philippines is considered a developing country and a lot of people live below the poverty line, they didn't have access to these things in the first place. So the fact that something tragic happens, such as a natural disaster, but then, you know, when an organization can come in and grant them access to all of these things is something I think is quite remarkable, and I think it's really cool. And it just basically gives them a second chance, you know, to start their lives over. And I liked this quote from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, which it says, "Climate change is now found to be the key factor accelerating all other drivers of forced displacement. These persons are not truly migrants in the sense that they did not move voluntarily. As forcibly displaced, not covered by the refugee protection regime, they find themselves in a legal void." And I like this because it's basically raising awareness that the government is finally, seeing all of these displaced people, and maybe perhaps now it's becoming a reality, and it just shows that something finally needs to be done about it, and it finally got the awareness it deserves. So the government has done a lot of policies that they enforced, and I listed 3 on the left, and the list could go on and on. But they also did Sustainable Development Goals of the Philippines, which kind of resembles the Millennium Goals. And I think they were set to have all these finished by the year 2030, which is only 10 years away, and they are quite behind because none of these are completed. And the common consensus of locals and NGO workers seem to think that the government's role in climate change relief is just non-existent and completely unhelpful. Current housing policy and mechanisms for housing subsidy have been deemed inadequate to resolve the rising house deficit. And there's a lot of programs, strategies that, the government should be enforcing, and they just do not follow through. And it's obvious that the government values the economy versus the residents' actual livelihood, which, brings up a moral dilemma. Is economic success more important than people's livelihoods? The government can enforce and talk about all the policies they want, and they encourage people to cut back, on fossil fuels and lower their ecological footprint. But at the same time, they're totally contradicting themselves. They heavily push coal-fired power plants, and it burns fossil fuels constantly, only adding to the problem they are trying to solve in the first place. And Philippine Congress always says that that they are going to contribute to emergency funds, but they never follow through. So the Philippine government has no credibility and not a great reputation. And they're always emphasizing like, hey, poverty is the problem, and that's true. Tropical storms hit the Philippines, and hitting the Philippines does not give the economy a chance to even flourish. So why not look at the big picture issue? And, there's a reason you're not able to get up to developed country status. Is because, it is poverty, but why are so many people poor? It's because climate change, all these natural disasters keep hitting, employment opportunities are destroyed, and it's a never-ending cycle until you finish the thing that's causing the overall problem. And a new battlefield that we are facing is the good old COVID-19. There's a lot of cases reported in the Philippines. And, this also brings up another topic of discussion. If a typhoon were to hit the Philippines tomorrow, the country lacks, the basic knowledge about it. It's a new thing. We can't ensure the ultimate amount of safety and security because the world is still trying to figure out everything about it. And it brings up, which emergency fund should more money be invested in. We could do the COVID-19 emergency fund, which, it gives money to support themselves and their family for when they're temporarily unemployed from their previous jobs, and it provides a, sense of peace. But on the other hand, climate relief emergency fund gives money to rebuild their villages, can relocate and have enough money to support themselves before getting back on their feet. But both of these things, these events are extremely unpredictable. They require preparedness and quick adaptation, and there's not a quick fix solution. And I think that's what people's problem is since they can't see an immediate snap of the finger, okay, I didn't drive my car today, let me see the world, the weather act up right. They don't think it's a real thing, or that it's a hoax or something. And it's a long lasting thing. So what the world can do and what the Philippines can do themselves is just make more eco-friendly decisions, avoid using greenhouse gases, conserve some of your water, simple things like walk or take your bike instead of driving, turn your lights off when you're not in the room. And, the 3 main premises, I don't really know, donate, to climate NGOs or nonprofits. You can volunteer in these NGOs abroad or locally, and just educate ourselves and people around us. It all comes back down to, you know, the golden rule: treat people how you want to be treated. If we're treating, you know, our environment, our surroundings terribly, you know, we're going to get the same in return. There's nothing that you can do about it unless you change your habits daily. And yeah, like I said earlier, climate change is not something that we can just vanish immediately, but it is something that is, you know, reversible. It just takes a lot of hard work and time. And just because we don't feel as harsh as the effects as places like the Philippines, it doesn't mean that there aren't lives on the line. Being careless about the repercussions of climate change is really selfish, and it will never vanish if we don't act on the issue. And so reality of it is, you know, climate change is our last resort for things. And it's, if we all come together collectively and, you know, take a stand for something like this, it sounds so cheesy and cliche, but like we can literally make the world a better place and safer for future generations. And it's easier said than done. These are all my references, but yes, that concludes it. Thank you. I don't know how to stop sharing. Stop sharing. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Sydney?
Okay, so I'll
Yes.
ask one just to be nice. So one of the things we talked about in INTS 200 this semester was that the Philippines is actually becoming call center headquarters for the world. I mean, it's becoming one of the hugest places. It's outpaced India now as sort of having all these call centers. And obviously those are probably located inland. I think a lot of them are in Manila and other big cities. But do you think those sorts of things can help the economy, or do you think really it's still going to be an agricultural economy?
I don't know. I thought about that, like what else, like what are there other alternatives? But I mean, you can't live without agriculture. I mean, if they have no economy hardly to start with, I mean, it raises an eyebrow, because I'm like, well, how? I don't know. I have no idea. How can you live without agriculture, but you don't have any money to get any, you know, exports from anybody else? I don't know. I have no idea. I think agriculture will have to stay there, but I think before they start working on the economy, I think they need to start putting in more strictly enforcing just policies on eco-friendliness, I guess.
So they are not making any efforts over there for alternative solutions for energy. For example, if they have these big storms, are they having any attempts to do something with the power of the wind?
Not that I read, but all I read about was that the government makes all these, you know, policies, and they don't abide by anything that they, you know, enforce. And it's all it seems like it's all in the non-governmental organizations and nonprofits and the residents' hands. I don't know. I just think something seems a bit corrupt over there, but I didn't get too far into it. But
yeah, Duterte is not the most admirable world leader.
No.
Sydney, if you were to recommend one thing, one solution that the Filipino government could implement to help either internally displaced people or climate refugees, what would it be? If you could pick one thing.
I really like that idea of what the island of, or no, I take that back. I don't think I read it. I think it's Australia. When to prepare for a natural disaster, they send out like 20 men and 20 women to like other countries, fully paid for, and then they work over there and build up all this financial, you know, income, and they bring it back, and then they are, you know, prepared at least financially for something. So I wish the Philippines had something like that, or even a relocation thing. I know it's like a total, like, just drop out. I'm out of the Philippines, see ya, but I don't know. I have no idea. Something though, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and the population is pretty big. It's about 110 million people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what they're gonna do. Something needs to be done, for sure.
Okay, yeah, I've done some research in the past on the Philippines, especially because of Duterte. He was one of the, supporters of President Trump, and he had the same ideas concerning COVID, that it doesn't exist. But also he was, a strong arm president concerning the approach on, how to solve the problem of drugs in the Philippines. And he authorized the police to shoot people on sight when they are found dealing with drugs, either buying or selling, especially selling. Thousands of people have been killed, and they don't even know how many in reality, and they don't allow people to film, when something like that, when the shooting happens. So he has, he got a lot of recognition from the deep side of the population, that the poorer ones initially, but then everybody's scared now that, they're poor and they will be killed. Because some people were taking drugs just to forget about being poor. Anyhow, it's a totally different story there, but there's also how certain rulers of certain countries are trying to deflect the attention of the population from the real issues of the country, rather than solving the problems of energy, problems of jobs, problems of like you were saying, the relocation in case of huge storms. He is just playing the card of being a strong man and bringing the society on the right path. Okay, any other questions concerning the presentation that we just heard from Sydney? If not, let's move on to Bethany Garcia. You will need to unmute yourself, Beth.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, let's try again. Hello, my name is Beth. For my major, I am the art, culture, communication focus. So for my project, I wanted to do an application project where I could kind of inspire maybe some other people to get into this program or start thinking about East Asia and things like that. So to begin with, like one of my biggest motivations for this project idea was participating in a program called Reach the World when I was studying abroad. I was introduced to this program through my one of my scholarships. And so it connects students and professionals that are abroad with classrooms that are back in the US so that you can kind of share your journey, teach children about whatever country you're visiting. You do little journal assignments, and then you get to video chat with them so they can ask you questions. And it's a really great program. I had so much fun. I connected with a classroom with a teacher who's a geography teacher in Nebraska. So he had several classrooms of third graders, and it really stuck with me. And I wanted to kind of base my application project with like those students in mind. So those students in Nebraska came from a low-income area, and my partner teacher, mentioned from the beginning that it was likely that those students would never leave that area. So I was thinking of ways that I could kind of bring different cultures to those kinds of children. So I built a Omeka website that examines children's literature from East Asia, which is primarily just like Japan, China, and Korea right now. Omeka is a free open source content management system, so you can build like websites with digital collections and exhibits. And so we're going to examine literature primarily aimed at children 3 to 9 years old, kind of that early childhood up until maybe 3rd or 4th grade, just as a way to introduce Asian culture through like fun and entertaining stories. And we'll look at how those books are demonstrating the aspects of that culture that children here in the US who haven't had a lot of diversity interaction what can they pull from that, and what can they learn from those books. And then while I was researching this, I did come across a really interesting project called the Japan, China, Korea Peace Picture Book Project. And I thought that was just such an amazing program or project. So I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. I also added that to my website. So here's a brief introduction to my website. Is this the welcome page on the left? So Omeka gives you the options of displaying your data in like collections that people can search through, or you can make your own kind of exhibit and direct where people go. So with those children in mind, I also have a close friend who is an elementary school teacher in a low-income area, and she does talk about how computer literacy is not the highest in that area. So I wanted to make sure that any parents or teachers that are trying to look up in some books that they can add to their classroom or read to their children, they're able to access this website very easily and navigate it very easily. So I kept it pretty simple, and I made sure that everything was very easy to like find and bounce back and forth. So I kept a navigation bar on the top where you can get to each section of literature and the picture book project. I have a navigation bar on the side where you can go to each section and pick out the specific books. And then even at the bottom, there's another one. So it's very easy to jump around wherever you need to go. And then there's also an option through Omeka. So whichever kind of data medium you're working with, you can add tags to it so that in your project, people are able to search for whatever they're looking for. So I added some tags to my images, and at the top right corner of my main page, there's a search bar. So if parents or students maybe are looking for something on a specific country or looking for, I don't know, a book related on family, they can type that into the bar and it'll pull up some images and or like a collection. If you'll see in this one, I do have some like a collection of Korean books. So they can find images that are related to that particular search or a whole collection, and they just go to there and find what they're looking for. So I'll show you some of the books that I've got in my collection. So I took a little bit of a different approach to each of the countries just for a little variety. So when I'm looking at South Korea, I wanted to look at books that are released here in the US, either by Korean American authors or Korean authors that now like live in the US and write children's books here. So I'll just go over one of them to show you how I broke it down. So this is a very popular book called The Name Jar by Yang Suk Choi. And it's the story of a little girl, Yoon-hae, who comes to South Korea, or comes from South Korea to live in the US with her family. So not only does it discuss Korean culture from her angle, it's also talking about immigration and then problems that new students have not just with going to a new school, but like going to a new country. So she has interactions with the other children. And even though they're very nice to her, the fact that they can't pronounce her name, and they have so many questions about where she comes from, it's very overwhelming for her. And she gets discouraged when she can't get them to pronounce her name. So she decides, okay, well, I want an American name then. And the other children are like, okay, we'll help you pick a name then. And they make a name jar for her in the classroom where they put in suggestions for a new name. But obviously throughout the book, we get to, look at why she was named Eunhye, what it means, that it has a special meaning to her and her family. And the other kids get to learn that, and they decide, we don't want you to pick a name, you already have one. So we are looking at, different aspects of Korean culture when we examine this book. So I pulled out, the like name forms and meanings in Korea. It's very important. So we talk about, if you look in the background here, how they're structured, and then we talk about how they're chosen and how their meaning can be based on, Korean words or Chinese characters, since Korea does have a lot of Chinese influence. And so in the back, this Bae-yong-jun would be person with courage and outstanding merits. So, Koreans really want to choose names that have like a good fortune, so that you can have good health and good fortune in the future. So we talk about that a little bit. I pull out images from the book that kind of demonstrate whichever topic I'm talking about under that book. And then we'll talk about other things from Korean culture that might have just been a brief page in the book. Like, for example, Eunhye gets a stamp from her grandma before she leaves Korea. So we'll talk about dojang, or name stamps in Korea, and how they're important. I think that's something that here in the US we don't have anything like that. So that's an interesting part of Korean culture that kids will be unfamiliar with. So these are the other books that I did in Korea. I picked them for just the different aspects of Korean culture that pop out. So bibimbap talks a lot about, it's a traditional Korean dish that this little girl's making with her mother. So we talk about, food in Korea and the importance of meals, and how people usually use meals as a way to kind of share time together and bond, and show you care. And then Dear Juno, he's corresponding with his grandmother that still lives in South Korea. And so she sends him little gifts that, keep him connected to his heritage, even though he lives in the US. So we talk about things like that. And then The Firekeeper's Son is a nice one that's set in a village in the 1800s. And we kind of talk about the importance of duty above personal desires in a lot of East Asian cultures, and how family loyalty and tradition is really important. And so from Japan, I wanted to look at very popular books that spawned like series of books. These are in Japan from Japanese authors. However, all of these books are translated into English and available. So my favorite probably on this whole list is Little Daruma and Little Tengu by Satoshi Kako. So this is a little Daruma, and he's friends with Little Tengu, and he's very envious of, Little Tengu's hat and his fan and his shoes. So he wants to emulate those things. So he goes back to his family and he says, please help me make these. And it's a really cute story. As you see the dad really trying to help him out. He's encouraging him. He has a lot of patience. I think that really shows a lot of important values that they want to teach in East Asian cultures. If you're an adult, it's really your duty to guide and help and encourage younger generations. And then younger generations, it's their duty to obey and kind of look up to those older generations. So we get a little bit of that. And then also, we're looking at Japanese folklore also in this story. So So we'll talk about aspects of Japanese culture, and then also I pulled out some information about these characters. So here we have a Daruma doll, and it is a little painted doll with the face of the founder of Zen Buddhism. So people usually give these dolls as gifts of encouragement. So that makes it very, understanding that, we can see how it's very important for the Daruma family to be very helpful and encouraging to little Daruma. So when you understand things like that. And then a Tengu, excuse me, is a creature from Japanese folklore. So it's part human, part bird, and eventually that beak, was kind of represented as that iconic, unnaturally long nose. And that's something that you see a lot in Japanese cultures, those masks of Tengu. Sorry. So, and then in subsequent books, little Daruma gets to meet other creatures from Japanese folklore. So you kind of get introduced to those, the mythology of Japan, while learning the lessons that we want to teach young children about being, with little Daruma, even though he got help from his family, it was eventually his own ingenuity that got him the perfect shoes or the perfect fan or the perfect hat to match his little friend. So I thought that was really cute. So these are the other 3 books that I talk about. So sorry. You Look Yummy is a really cute one with dinosaurs in it. But it talks about maybe like an unlikely father-son relationship, which is a big idea or concept in obviously East Asian culture, but Japan also is that relationship between father and son. And it kind of epitomizes like the Confucian ideals of how people interact with each other and like what is the ideal relationship. So we talk about that a little bit. The 14 Forest Mice and the Harvest Moon Watch obviously talks about the tradition of Tsukimi, which is a Harvest Moon festival. So we talk about different like foods and traditions and things that you can see the little field mice doing in their tree that reflect what people have been doing for this Harvest Moon festival for thousands of years. And then Guri and Gura is, again, 2 little mice. And it's a very whimsical little story about teaching children what's important about sharing and friendship. And again, it also brings in that food aspect of Japanese culture, East Asian culture, really, and how food can be kind of a communal act, and then it really brings people together and helps them bond. And then again, we're going to go right into the Japan, China, Korea Peace Picture Book Project. So I added this section. It might be a little bit on the higher end of age range for children. These books are a little serious, so probably that closer to the 8 or 9 year olds. You don't want to be giving this to like preschool kids. So the background of the project, in about around 2005, 2006, Japan's relations with its neighbors were kind of deteriorating. So these group of authors reached out to their colleagues in China and South Korea to kind of partner up and address some issues that were kind of simmering and causing these this deterioration. So I have here a little quote. Their mission was to document the past honestly, share today's sorrow, and create a peaceful tomorrow together. So there's 11 books total, and what they do is they discuss sensitive topics related to war, but from a civilian's perspective. And for most of the books, it's from a child's perspective. So while we do know a lot of the history behind these specific stories, in the book itself, we usually don't address those. We just kind of look at it from the view of a child, and so their confusion and their emotions witnessing these issues. So to start from Japan, they have 4 books, and here are some of the covers. Each of these books in this series are supposed to be translated in all 3 countries, obviously. That's how they're going to make this connection. So I've got some of the covers over here. Now, their primary subjects is kind of an abstract idea of war and the consequences. They don't talk about any particular events. It's more like, one is called What is Peace? And so they talk about, I have a little quote here, what truly is peace? We don't make war, we don't drop bombs, we don't destroy houses and towns, because we want to be together with our friends and our loved ones. So that's kind of the prospect of that, like little children going through and saying, what is their idea of peace? And what do we not want? And then another one is, Can You Hear My Voice? And it's a story of these 2 brothers that go to war and eventually both of them die. But at the end, a ghost kind of speaks to the reader and they say, for whom do you kill? Whom are you killed? For whom do you die? So they're just kind of talking about just the overall consequences of war, especially from like a younger generation's perspective. So there are issues with publications for some of these books. For the Japanese series, there is one called Sakura by Seiichi Tabata. It's not currently published in China. I don't think there's any official statement about that, but there have been sources close to the Japanese writer that say that there are wartime slogans that are depicted, and the Chinese publisher would not publish them included, and they wanted them removed. But Tabata said absolutely not. So as of right now, it's kind of still at a standstill, and there is no Sakura in China. And then we have some books from South Korea. So these 4, Flower Grandma, When Spring Comes to the DMZ, Corn, and Chunhee, She's a Baby. So I believe of these ones, Flower Grandma and When Spring Comes to the DMZ are in English. They are difficult to find though, but they do exist. So here are some of the covers. So these ones are primarily discussing the Japanese occupation and the consequences of that invasion. When Spring Comes to the DMZ, obviously talks about the separation of North and South Korea and how there are still families that are parted because of that and that ongoing issue. So the issues with publications in the Korean books is definitely Flower Grandma, it's the main one. It's by Kwon Yoon-dok, and it deals with the sensitive subject of comfort women, which if you don't know, that's when Japan was going through Korea and China, they took a lot of women and young girls to be like into forced prostitution at like these comfort stations for soldiers. So obviously Japanese publishers originally refused to publish this because the Japanese government was completely denying the existence of comfort women and that ever happened. But thankfully a small publisher, I think, stepped up and got the book published. So it is also in all 3 languages. And then we have books from China. So these ones are, again, primarily dealing with the consequences of the Sino-Japanese War that raged from about 1937 to 1945. These are really interesting, though, because it's very internal. It's talking about, I guess, obviously conflict with Japan, but it is on a very like local scale where it's just small villages and how children are the main narrator in all 3 of these books, and just how they view these big events. But they obviously do not have the information that we as adults have as to why they're happening and what's going on. So like, for example, a fan of Peking opera is a little girl who has a spare room in her family's house, and an opera star comes to live with them. And she's just absolutely in love with opera and is so excited about everything. And that kind of shows her happiness in her life. And then the story takes place right before the fall of Nanjing. So we kind of experience that through her and how she loses all that beauty and happiness in her life. So as far as I understand, I didn't see any issues with publications for the Chinese books. And I think it's more because it is more self-reflective. and less kind of blaming other countries. So for my conclusion, I just left up here cultural competency and a little quote from Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And I think it's really important to help spark that interest in younger students and our young children very early. You know, they're so curious and open and inquisitive in that age period, the age range, that it's a great time to introduce, you know, diversity and cultural books and things like that. Not everybody lives in a culturally diverse area of the country, and not everybody has the financial means to travel and things like that. So how do we bring that to, you know, those children? You know, that's gonna, opening them up to that early, I think, is gonna help raise, like, you know, citizens that are globally aware, you know, not just within different countries in the different countries in the world, but like different cultures within the US also. And I think that's something that's really needed right now. So that's what I aimed my project at. How can I, you know, help spark that with that excitement in younger children? And this is a project that I plan to just keep working on and hopefully building up in the future. So that is all. Those are all my sources. Oops.
So Beth, actually, what did you say the name of the website was, or how can we get on that website?
Sorry, I don't think I mentioned that. It's Children's Lit, all lowercase, no spaces, .omeka.net.
Okay. And by the way, you are sharing over there just copies of the covers of the books, or even the content of the books?
It's the covers and some of the content, not obviously the full book, but there are some images from some of the pages and some of the text that I have just to reinforce the things that I'm talking about. But obviously I didn't want to overstep any copyright issues by putting too much out there.
And the content is in English or in the original language?
Yeah, they're all in English. These books all have English versions. Mm-hmm. So you can actually read the pages. And a lot of them I found too, if you like, when you look at YouTube, there are people who will read through the book, teachers or parents. So even if you can't find the book out in stores, there are other options online to find them.
And you mentioned this on the website?
No, but I will.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm not a specialist in copyright law, but you need to really protect yourself and, you know, research how many pages actually is enough to infringe on the copyright law. You might be in a great deal of trouble. It's a very beautiful initiative. I would support it, but you know, these are laws, and you have to pay attention. Any questions for Beth from anybody?
I'll just make a comment. I had the discussion of the name jar was really interesting. I had good friends in graduate school who were Korean, and my friend, the wife of the couple, I remember talking to her where she was asking us what she could change her name, her Americanized name to. And we asked her why she wanted to do that. And she said, you know, difficulty of pronunciation for Americans and might help her to fit in. And luckily we were able to talk with her about that and say, you should just force us to say your name correctly. And she ended up doing that. But I thought that was really reminded me of that conversation from some time back.
So I have a question. So when you were going through the different tabs and sections that you did Japan and you did South Korea. I assume you left out China for time so you could focus on the Peace Project one. What kinds of themes did you find in the China section?
The Chinese section, I had books in mind, but they are very difficult to find resources and images from reliable sources on those. So I cut that section for right now because
okay.
of time constraints. There were some books that I was looking at that were talking a lot about, again, friendship and building those relationships and kind of, you know, your, I guess, proper ways to act in order to, you know, build those relationships and build friendship. But I didn't get a chance to really go into those because I was struggling with the sources.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I would advise you, if you want to make this bigger and if you have the time, to contact directly consulates, embassies of those countries and ask for permission. Because actually this is an attempt to popularize the culture that originally comes from these three countries.
Mm. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Any questions? Actually, I wanted to commend you for such an initiative. It's just that, you know, I would recommend that you pay attention that you are not, you know, prosecutable for anything like that. But it's a great initiative, and actually this is what I was looking for from the very beginning with the formatting for the capstone experience. I tried, you know, I don't know if you've seen it, but I think I shared at a certain moment on our Facebook page. I had a Chinese student 2 years ago who put together a book of resources for bilingual people who speak English and Chinese in the St. Louis area. You know, I helped him make the cover because I have the graphic design software, and many people were interested in getting a hold of that, especially for new immigrants from China. Yes, so this is something practical. This is really something that can be used to improve relations between countries, but you need to pay attention,
Yes.
you know, what is permissible and what not.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, the last call. Any other questions? Nancy, at the end of this recording, you don't want them to stay on or to come back for a discussion with you?
They can if they want to. I mean, if anybody wants to come back for any, you know, final discussion or any other questions after Soren closes it, you need to log back in. So I'll open it, but then you need to log back in.
Okay. Well, great job, everybody. Thank you very much. This is what I was looking for INTS 499. Thank you. Have a great day.